Hi friends, welcome back to Liz's Reading Corner, or welcome if you're new here. I'm Liz and I like books, and this is my February reading wrap-up video. This month was a little bit quieter than January. I really struggled to finish just anything. I was kind of in, not a reading slump, but I was just kind of all over the place with just my reading and what I wanted to read and what I felt like reading, just the joys of being a mood reader basically. I started so many books and I actually didn't get a lot of them finished. I think because I had so much going on and I just really struggled to concentrate. I didn't DNF the books, it just took a lot longer to finish them, that's all. So with that being said, I read 10 books this month. It was a total of 3,120 pages. My average rating was 3.25 stars, and I only DNF'd one book this month. So far I've read 22 books this year, out of my goal of 80 books, which means I'm 27.5% of the way through. And the genre that I read the most this month was thriller, which I feel like no one is surprised by. So the first book that I read in February was His and Hers by Alice Feeney. We follow Anna Andrews, who is a newsreader who is desperate to get her life back on track as a news presenter after the woman who she was covering comes back from maternity leave. Anna is then sent to Blacktown to cover a murder. Blacktown is just a quintessential British village that Anna just wants nothing to do with for reasons. Detective Jack Harper is suspicious of Anna's coverage of this murder case for more than one reason, ends up becoming a suspect in his own investigation. This was my third Alice Feeney book. I enjoyed it a lot. It's not, in my opinion, it's not quite as good as the others. I feel like the other books that I've read were just a lot better. I felt that this was a little bit, I don't know, slower pace, or there was just some stuff in the book that just, it didn't really feel like it needed to be there. It was very twisty-turny. I did enjoy like the twists within the book. It was, as always, well written. Alice Feeney just has this knack of writing amazing books. I kept thinking I knew exactly where the story was going to go, and I was not there. I didn't pick it. Right up until the very last page, I did not manage to pick it, so that was pretty cool. And I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I read Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham. This story follows Margot, who is at the end of her freshman year in college when she meets Lucy. Margot has had a horrible year. Her high school best friend, who she was supposed to be attending college with, died 3 weeks after their graduation, after their high school graduation. And Margot, aside from going to classes, spent basically her entire year in her dorm. After she meets Lucy, Margot moves into a share house with Lucy and 2 other girls. The share house is owned by a fraternity. The frat house is right next door to the share house that Margot moves into. Lucy is quite literally the polar opposite of Margot. She's outgoing, she's bold, she's basically everything that Margot wishes that she could be. And as Margot and Lucy become really close friends, things take a big turn. When Lucy goes missing, one of the fraternity boys is murdered, and the whole thing is being investigated by the police. This was the first Stacey Willingham book that I read, and I loved it. I was hooked right from the beginning. Stacey manages to write characters really well. Like, if you are meant to hate that character, you hate that character. If you're meant to love that character, you love that character. That is crazy to me, and it seems to be just a really rare thing that not a lot of authors manage to do, especially when it comes to like horror and thriller and mystery and murder mystery and that sort of thing. It's not something that you see, or not something I see a great deal. I picked part of the twist, but not the entire thing, which was really cool, because I really love when I can't pick the ending. It kind of ruins the book a little bit if you manage to pick the ending. And I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I read Don't Forget Me by Rhea Frey. This book follows Ruby, who is trying to have a fresh start after an early retirement from her career as an emergency department nurse. Ruby, her husband Tom, and their daughter Lily move into basically one of those designed communities. So it's a brand new community. Everyone has like designer everything. Everything's perfect. Everyone seems to be perfect, so that they can get it away from it all. they appear to be the perfect family, and not everything is as perfect as it seems. Lily suddenly goes missing. Not long afterwards, so does Tom, and Ruby, unsure of how to cope, turns to her neighbors and her community and her hobbies to help her get through all of this. Then one day, Ruby finds a body in the lake when she is out rowing, which is apparently her favorite pastime, and things in the community take a sinister turn as everyone is sure that this body is actually Ruby's missing husband, Tom, and Ruby is positive that it's not him. And so more and more secrets are uncovered as Ruby tries to figure out what really happened to her family, and everyone in the town suspects Ruby of murder. So I liked this book. I enjoyed the plot. I enjoyed like the many twists and turns within the book. That was pretty cool. So there were sections as you're reading through the book that were kind of like forum posts or like social media posts, which is like a lot of comments. Those parts were really just not for me. I didn't enjoy those. I ended up skimming through them to make sure that there was nothing important that I was missing, but that was basically it. I felt like they just didn't really add anything to the book, and so yeah, once I read the first one and realized what it was, I just ended up skimming through the rest. But overall the book was good and I enjoyed it, and I gave it 3 stars. So next I read Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I'll be talking about this book in another video more in depth because I'm doing like I think I've said before, I'm reading through the Goodreads top 100 most difficult novels to read. But just to quickly get into this, it was deceptive. This book has 188 pages, and a big chunk of those, or at least the one that I borrowed from the library, a big chunk of those pages are, I shouldn't say a big chunk, about 70 or so pages are just like notes and things about the author and like the introduction and that sort of thing. So 108-ish pages was the actual story. If you're interested in hearing more about this and the other books on that list that I'm reading through, that will be in a video very shortly that's coming out, or a reading vlog, because I'm turning to reading vlogs. But for the sake of transparency for this video, I gave that book 2 stars. So next I read The Fury by Alex Michaelides. This book is narrated by a character by the name of Elliot Chase. It basically follows his obsession over a retired movie star by the name of Lana Farrar. Lana invites her son, husband, and 2 of her closest friends, one of those being Elliot, to a weekend on her private island in Greece. A bad storm hits the island. They're all cut off from the outside world completely for the night, and this is where things start to go horribly wrong. One of the characters ends up dead, and everyone else has to figure out who did it. This was genuinely one of the slowest thrillers I have read in a very long time, or like ever. I struggled to get into the story. I really didn't enjoy Elliot Chase, the character who's narrating the book. I don't like him. I don't like the character. There was a lot of jumping around in the story, which made it a little bit jarring, or not even a little bit, it was very jarring, because it was constantly jumping between timelines, and I just didn't like that. I didn't like the characters. The characters were not very interesting. Literally none of them were interesting. The plot twist at the end was literally the only thing that I liked about this entire book, and because of that I gave it 2 stars. Next I read His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is the first book in the Temerariah series. It has 9 books, 3 novellas, and what looks like a collection of short stories about other characters within the series. This is an historical fiction meets fantasy with dragons. It's set in the early 1800s when Napoleon Bonaparte was trying to invade England. We follow Captain Will Lawrence of the HMS Reliance. Reliant captures a French frigate, which is full of severely malnourished sailors because they just sailed through a storm. And the Reliant attacks them, beats them, or wins the fight, however you want to. They win. The crew of the Reliant win. But because the Frenchmen put up such a fight, Lawrence is wanting to know. He's suspicious as to why they put up such a fight. They search the ship, find there's a dragon egg on the ship that's actually close to hatching, and the crew then have to draw straws as to who is going to be the person that the dragon chooses, this is gonna be a spoiler, the person that drew the short straw was not actually the person that the dragon ended up bonding with. It ended up being Captain Lawrence, so Captain Lawrence has to resign from his post as the captain of the ship, and then goes into the aerial corps as the master of this dragon, who he names Temeraire. And then Temeraire and Lawrence have to train a lot to get up to speed, because typically people would be training for most of their lives to become a part of the aerial corps and be a dragon rider. And then they aid the British army in staving off Bonaparte, basically. This book was recommended to me by a friend, Liv. I love you, you're amazing. It amazes me just how well she picked this, because when she recommended this to me, she was like, oh, I think you'll really like this series. And I have absolutely fallen in love with it. It is probably the greatest dragon series that I have read. I wish more than anything else in the world that Temeraire actually existed and that he was my dragon companion. I love him so much. He is just the most beautiful little dragon. Oh, not little, dragons aren't little, but he's just amazing. I love him. I love his inquisitive nature. I love his love for books. I love his just love for wanting to know everything about everything. He's just, it's so well written that you can't help but fall in love with him. And even though this book is short for a fantasy book, it is by no means boring. I loved it. I honestly can't wait to read the rest of them. I'm going to be trying to read the entire series this year, because I just need to know, I need more Temeraire in my life, basically. And for all of that, I gave this book 5 stars, which means this was my first 5-star read of the year. Next, I read The Book Eaters by Sunny Dean. This story follows a secret and diminishing species of humans, for lack of a better term, called book eaters. They're basically people who eat books for sustenance and knowledge. So each book has a different flavor to them depending on what the story is, how it was bound, or what it's bound in, when it was published, how old it is, that sort of thing. The main character, Devon, is a book eater that has been raised on fairy tales of princesses and castles and just all things that little girls are meant to be raised on. Girls are rare, so rare that there was only 3 of them of marrying age by the time Devon was of marrying age, Devon being one of them. Each of the female or the girls has to go through 2 marriages, and in each marriage they are meant to produce 1 child. They then, once that child is 4, have to leave the child with the father, and they just have to carry on as if they never had that child. They just basically have to pretend that that child is non-existent, which I couldn't imagine. So Devon is tricked into believing that she'll get to stay with her first child, and then is cruelly ripped away from the child. She's been told that she's like defective because she became too attached to this child, or she's not normal, I should say, not defective. She's then married a second time, and this time the child that she bears is actually defective. So instead of being like a normal book eater, he's born with a tongue that is like a proboscis. These are actually called mind eaters. I'm sure you can understand what that proboscis is for. So the mind eaters are a subset of book eaters who, when they are grown, are used by other book eaters called knights. So the knights control the mind eaters by this drug that one of the families makes. And the knights keep the families of book eaters in check by basically lording these mind eaters over them. Devon vows not to make the same mistakes that she did with her first child, and when the family that makes the drug collapses, Devon is used by the knights to find the family, or the remains of the family who made this drug. The knights use her. I didn't do a very good job at explaining that. The knights use Devon to try and track down the family, or the rest of the family that made this drug that keeps the mind eaters at bay. However, Devon has her own plans, and yeah, that's kind of the basic premise of the book. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't consider this to be horror. I didn't find it horror. I didn't think it was really all that scary. It had certain elements that could be considered horror, or certain scenes. There was like maybe 2 scenes that could be considered as horror, or like they were slightly gory, but overall I wouldn't call this a horror story. As a warning to people, this does have elements of sexual assault and everything related to sexual assault, so just be mindful of that. Completely unrelated, there's also a subplot, or a lesbian subplot, so this is also advertised as an LGBT/queer fiction. In general, though, I just didn't really enjoy the book. I found it very slow. I found the plot very uninteresting. I thought that the fact that they ate books would be more of like a overarching plot, like more involved within the story, but that was just kind of like mentioned at the start, and then that was the end of it. Like, it didn't really go much more into it. I don't know why I expected it, because it is like a small part of the book, but everything that I saw promoting the book made it seem like it was a bigger thing in the book. I'm not sure why. Yeah, it was just kind of just a really meh read. I almost DNF'd it. I almost wish I had DNF'd it, because I was really holding out hope that the end would actually be better than what it was, and it wasn't. Overall, I was just disappointed with this book, and I gave it 2 stars. Next, I read The Midnight Man by Carolyn Mitchell. So in this book, we learn the story of the Midnight Man. So he's a supposed supernatural being who, if you write your name on a piece of paper, soak it in blood, knock on the door 22 times, the last knock has to be at exactly midnight, and open the door to him, he will come and he will play a deadly game of hide and seek with you. Your only defense is the light coming from a candle or a salt ring around you, and you play until I think it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. So on Halloween night in Slayton, 5 girls go to Blackhall Manor, and which is like the creepy house that every town seems to have, and they play the game of the Midnight Man, and only 4 of them return. So it's up to Detective Sarah Noble to find out what happened to the girl that didn't return, but first she has to face her own past. I really quite enjoyed this book. I actually watched, so there's a movie on, I think it's Netflix, called The Midnight Man, and I thought that that movie was based off of this book, and it turns out that while they have similar premises, like the story of the Midnight Man and like how he works and how he's summoned is the same, but everything else is completely different, and they're actually 2 completely unrelated stories, which was a little bit disappointing, because it would have been cool to have read the book if the movie was based off a book. But anyway, so this book is slated for fans of Stephen King and C.J. Tudor, and I can kind of understand why with like the theme of the book. It's somewhat twisty-turny. It's probably more of a police procedural over a horror story. The horror elements are kind of not prominent in the story, for lack of a better term. It's definitely more police procedural. It's definitely based more off of like the detective side of, or the fact that Sarah is a detective as opposed to like a horror story. There is a traumatic event in Sarah's past that I feel the reveal of it was not great. It could have been done a lot better, especially because it was involving her husband, and so this really greatly affected her, and just the way that it was revealed as to like what that event was a little bit disappointing. It could have been done better, basically. It's also a multi-point of view story, but the only points of view that I found interesting or even relevant to the story were Sarah's and the Midnight Man's. So it felt like there was a lot of filler within the book. I guess I was kind of hoping for more of like a supernatural horror, kind of like The Shining style, and what we got was like just a police procedural, kind of like a James Patterson style book more than anything. So yeah, I really wanted to like this book more, and I couldn't, so I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read The Housetrap by Emma Reed. This is a middle grade fantasy set in spooky woods. We follow Claude and his 2 friends, Delia and Sam. They have to find Claude's little sister Amity after she disappears into the creepy woods that are behind Claude's house. The children have been warned by the adults not to go into the woods because children have a tendency, if they go into the woods, not to come back out. Claude, Delia, and Sam find a mysterious old mansion in the middle of the woods, and when they walk inside, they find that they are actually trapped in a house that is frozen in the 1930s. So they discover that this house is actually a puzzle, and they have to solve the puzzle in order to get out. They also discover that they're not the only children that are trapped in this house. This was such a nice quick read. It was really nice. I don't want to say cozy, but it was just a really nice read. It was just a good children's book. I honestly can't wait to read this with my little man. I think this is exactly, he loves Goosebumps, so this is exactly the kind of story that he would love to read. This is probably one of the best kind of like introduction to horror or like thriller for children that I've seen in a very long time. And so if you have a child that's kind of wanting or showing interest in like horror, thriller, mystery sort of genres, this is definitely a good book to introduce them to those sorts of genres, and I gave it 4 stars. So the last book that I read in February was Stay Close by Harlan Coben. This is another multi-point of view story. They seem to be really popular lately. We follow Megan, Ray, and Jack. Megan is a soccer mum who used to have a wild past but now lives in suburbia with her 2 kids, her perfect husband, her perfect white picket fence house basically, and she hates it all. Ray is Megan's former lover who used to be a documentary photographer, but after a traumatic incident in his past, he now finds himself in a dead-end job pretending to be paparazzo for rich kids. I can understand why you wouldn't enjoy that. Jack is a detective who can't let go of a cold case. It was a missing person whose family is still waiting for closure. This book, I just don't know. I don't know. It was fast-paced, and the premise was good. The premise was there, but the execution was just not. I don't know if it was just not for me, but I just found it very bland. I found the characters very uninteresting. Megan really annoyed me. She just made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and by the end of it I was just like, you know what, you made all these bad decisions, you deserve everything you get. What do you want? Like, what do you expect? Really wanted to enjoy it because the idea behind it was amazing, but it just, yeah, everything was just I ended up just not caring about any of the characters. Jack was really boring. I felt bad for Ray, especially when you find out like what happened, like the traumatic incident in his past and what happened and how it affected him. But at the same time, the story was just like very anticlimactic, and this is another book that I kind of wish that I had just DNF'd because it was just average at best. So I gave it 3 stars. And this month I DNF'd 1 book, which is a lot better than January. And that book was Babel by R.F. Kuang. I've noticed when it comes to her books that people will either like the Poppy War series or they will like Babel and Yellowface, but very rarely do people like both. I am on the Poppy War series. I loved the Poppy War series. It was amazing. So if you haven't already heard about this book, most people who read like fantasy know about this book, but if you haven't heard, this follows an orphan by the name of Robin Swift. He is orphaned in the cholera outbreak in Canton. He is then brought to London by a mysterious benefactor called Professor Lovell. He's trained for years in Latin, ancient Greek, and Chinese. He's being a native Chinese speaker, that makes sense. In preparation for the day when he will enroll in Oxford, so Oxford University, he's going to be enrolled in the Royal Institute of Translation, which is also known as Babel. Babel has many different programs, the most important of which is a program that centers around silverworking, or the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation using these silver bars, I think it was. I DNF'd this book. I got bored. I didn't enjoy it. So I DNF'd this just after Robin gets to Oxford and goes through the tour of Babel. I think it was like about 100 pages in. I just couldn't read it. I found it really boring. Oh, not boring. I just found the story really uninteresting. I found the characters uninteresting. I found the whole premise behind it uninteresting. It was very wordy. I just didn't enjoy it. I couldn't keep my attention on it. It became a chore to read, and so I just DNF'd it. So those are the books that I read and DNF'd in February. Overall, I would say it was probably a worse reading month compared to January. My overall average was a lot, oh, not a lot less, but a little bit less than January. It's definitely not the worst reading month that I've had. I've had far, far worse, but hopefully March will be better, especially because I have a few anticipated reads that I'm really looking forward to, especially Empire of the Damned. I can't wait. Just quickly, I think I've touched on this in another video, but just quickly, I will be changing how I do my monthly wrap-ups from here. I'm going to be transitioning more to reading vlogs, which is quite intimidating because I still feel, not that it probably shows, but I still feel really awkward being in front of a camera, and reading vlogs seem to be a lot more intimate. I just want to make my monthly reading wrap-ups a little bit more streamlined as well. I saw, what's her name? Meg with Books. I saw how Meg with Books does her reading wrap-ups, and I actually really like that. I think that it's a lot better. So I'm probably going to be looking at doing something kind of her style, or not her style, but something kind of similar. Especially because, so I find watching these sorts of videos where someone literally just sits down and talks at the camera to be really boring. And I don't want to be doing content that I find boring, that I wouldn't be watching. And so I'm trying to figure out what works best for you all, what works best for this channel, and obviously what works better for myself. But yeah, so there's going to be a few really awkward reading vlogs coming out until I sort of settle into how to do those, basically. That's it for this video. If you've stuck with me this long, I appreciate you. It was a pretty long one this time. Have you read any of these books? What were your thoughts? As always, I would love to hear them. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!